provide young people and innovators and entrepreneurs with skills in different programs in relation to innovation, in startup space where they're creating businesses, SMEs that are looking to grow their businesses as well through online courses and collaborative programs with institutions and organizations. We're able to provide these programs for them in an affordable and an accessible way, thereby democratizing it more for people who may not have access or academic credentials as well. So for today's webinar, we are seeking to initiate this discussion around rules of origin, whereby it's at a crucial point where after the AfCFTA was launched on the 1st of January in 2021, we're facing various existential crises such as wars, political instability, and climate change, cybercrime, and pandemics as we have with COVID-19, and external economic shocks that really threaten to unravel the gains that have been made with the AfCFTA, confronted by challenges such as African countries where we've lacked consensus to agree on different matters, or even competing priorities and objectives as we are as human beings, where each person may have their objectives and priorities. The AfCFTA offers an opportunity to establish these institutionalized dialogue forums in which actors can interact and define key policy issues and establish a common policy direction. So this series is geared towards converging these minds across the continent, as we see with these excellent panelists that we have, in order to galvanize key stakeholders towards common action and critical issues that are necessary to the success of the AfCFTA. This entails a series of webinars which we'll be having every 6 weeks on topical priorities in the AfCFTA. And the webinars aim to convene key stakeholders and promote information exchange on the most important topics, including the present status and implementation of the AfCFTA agreement, as well as phase 2 of negotiations of AfCFTA agreement on cross-border trade, investment, industrialization, and transformation, among many others. So the sessions will present up-to-date data and policies and the implications with a view to enable linkages across sectors and establish practical steps. And the key questions will be, what is the present status of this sector? You know, where this can be briefly described as, say, with rules of origin, where are different industries? As today you'll see that we have different representatives from different sectors, different specializations and background, and you know what needs to be done to address these challenges, and what is the role of the AfCFTA in advancing the priorities of this sector, and what commitment will guide the next phase of development. You know, and this dialogue series will also contribute towards the development of a book on the AfCFTA existential priorities, and the sessions will be held on Zoom as we are having them now, and include brief presentations from keynote speakers, as you'll see on the ones we have on the panel, and the outcomes of the webinar series, which shall be shared with the policymakers, and continue to support the Secretariat of the AfCFTA. So with this webinar, we are looking at the harmonization of soft infrastructure related to the governance of intra-regional trade, such as the rules of origin, for this key discussion, where we're looking at product standards, where you look at local standardization initiatives, such as you have bureaus of standards, or global as you have ISO, or HACCP as you have for regionals. So looking at what these product standards are like, and accreditation systems as you have with trade organizations within each nation and within each trading bloc, to facilitate increased inter-regional trade. And this webinar, as we discuss the rules of origin of industrialization, the focus will be on the AfCFTA rules of origin for textiles and clothing, automotives, sugar and sugar products that would promote regional value chains in industrialization across Africa, as well as the purpose of this webinar to promoting the information sharing through a discussion of 3 sectors of textiles, clothing, automotives, and sugar, where the forum is not intergovernmental process, or neither is it a negotiation. This is not meant to shape positions, but it's really meant to be only for information sharing and discussion, rules of origin, and for industrialization in these chosen sectors. So as you will see, the participants are students, researchers, young African private sector leaders, stakeholder leaders, and we'll be running this for the next hour and a half. And I really Thank you for being here. And as our co-organizers, we have the Strathmore University Business School. We also have Trade Policy and the Training Center in Africa, TRAPCA, as well. And we have technical support from the KNCCI with technological support as well. So I'll welcome Dr. Francis Mangeni to introduce for the introduction of the forum and also to begin his section of the session. Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon, good day. Thank you so much, Favour, for your fiery introductory remarks, which set the scene for this webinar, which is a second in a series of webinars that we shall be holding. Now, I'd like to start off by commending you, Favour, your colleague Diana, the African Young Trade Professionals, as your organization is called, for being co-organizers of this event. I thank also Tropica, that's Trade Policy in Africa School, which is based in Arusha, which operates out of Arusha, in conjunction with Lund University for being co-organizers. As well as the Strathmore Business School. And I recognize Dr. George Njenga, who is the executive dean of that school. So thank you so much for being part of this event and for co-organizing it. Now, what are rules of origin? Rules of origin, which we are discussing today, answer the question, is this product made in Africa, and therefore to get the preferential treatment under the African Continental Free Trade Area? And to answer that question, rules of origin go through criteria or systematic series of a checklist, so to speak. Let's call it a checklist. First of all, is this product wholly produced or processed in Africa? If the answer is yes, then that product qualifies to be made in Africa and can get preferential treatment. Is it processed from only imported inputs? Then the answer is no, that product is not made in Africa if it's processed for only imported inputs. Is it processed with some imported inputs? And the answer to that would be yes, if it has sufficient local content to qualify as made in Africa. And local content to be sufficient should be around 40% of the total value of the product, more or less, either more, slightly more, or slightly less. According to the rules of origin that have been negotiated, it's either slightly more or slightly less. But for most tariff lines, for most products, it's pegged at 40%. Now, we should also bear in mind that there is continental accumulation, which can increase local content. That means if an input is imported from any other African country, then it's considered to be local input, regardless of which country that product is being produced in. If that product is being produced in Zambia with the imported inputs from other African countries, then it qualifies to be made in Zambia. There's also a tolerance value of 10%. So we would like to be optimistic that it's possible to have actually local content that is sufficient enough or significantly high, that can reach actually 40% or even slightly more for made in Africa products, which can boost intra-Africa trade and regional value chains, because through local content, we promote trade in intermediate products and therefore regional value chains, and we promote industrialization. But then rules of origin, their administration needs to be transparent. It needs to be user-friendly so that preference utilization can increase or can be high. And then we need an efficient system for addressing non-tariff barriers, because the rules of origin can actually result in non-tariff barriers for all sorts of reasons, where there are queries and there's need for clarification. And I would like at this stage to point to a URL or a website, which is very user-friendly and interactive and stakeholders can use it in reporting trade barriers, including those that can arise with regard to the administration of rules of origin, both in exporting countries and in importing countries. And this is trade barriers, that's one word, .africa. So it is https://tradebarriers.africa. You can compare that also with www.tradebarriers.org, which is a system that has been in place for more than 10 years between EAC, COMESA, and SADC. That's a group of about 29 countries, which constitute more than half of Africa. And on that group, the success rate has been very high through just clarification of issues that are reported on that system. Now, the AfCFTA is a motherboard and a movement. It's the development initiative covering markets, industrialization, infrastructure, peace and political stability through integration, because when you integrate, when you trade together, you don't want to go to war. And it promotes macroeconomic stability through growing the real economy. The AfCFTA introduces policy reforms through implementation and compliance for ease of doing business, that promote ease of doing business, for trade facilitation through implementing the annexes and the various provisions in the main agreements. Inclusiveness, which means that nobody's left behind. Women, young Africans, SMEs are on board, and through regional value chains. The AfCFTA reinforces predictability, good trade governance, and rule of law for long-term planning. This is extremely important for investment, right? Because we have a dispute settlement system. The rules are to be implemented. You have to abide by them. This is important for long-term planning. It's important for infrastructure, as I've just said, long-term planning, as I've just said, and for infrastructure development, which of course requires long-term planning because the projects are quite huge when it comes to infrastructure, both with regard to transport, surface and air transport, to energy, to ICT, and to rural infrastructure, as well as agricultural infrastructure, whether that's irrigation or water resources. The AfCFTA promotes and introduces economies of scale because of the large market, which will boost trade, investment, financing, infrastructure, cultural industries, talk of Hollywood, for instance, economic and political Pan-Africanism through increasing the scope of operation across the continent. So this is what we would like to say in terms of introduction. But the elephant in the room is, of course, the state of play. Where exactly do things stand? So we've got 54 signatures still, 40 ratifications, 44 tariff offers. We got 4 more. We're talking about 40 just a few weeks ago, in fact. 20 of which have been verified to be technically sound and to cover 90% of product lines. We have got 86% of the tariff lines with the rules of origin, 33 services offers. Trading commenced on the 1st of January 2021, though there are some outstanding issues. Now, tariff, rules of origin, and services negotiations continue. They were supposed to be completed by the end of June, but that deadline, sadly, has been missed. I think the ministers have approved, and we request the summit to formally endorse a small extension, a short extension. Phase 2 negotiations are beginning in earnest. As a matter of fact, negotiations on competition, I saw a meeting is being called, I think, for the 13th of August or 12th of August. So intellectual property, investment, digital trade, women and youth in trade, negotiations are beginning on these phase 2 issues. The Secretariat is up and running, and we recruit 297 staff over the next 4 years. There's a Secretary General in place with a suite of advisors and directors, a director for trading goods, a director for trading services, and other phase 2 issues. And there are supportive tools in place. In addition to tradebarriers.org, or tradebarriers.africa, which I mentioned for addressing non-tariff barriers, we also have a market intelligence tool. That's the Africa Trade Observatory, the URL for which is ato.africa. And we have a URL for trading medical products, in pharmaceuticals, to deal with the to deal with the COVID pandemic, and that is the Africa Medical Supplies Platform, which is at amsp.africa. Now, the other thing that I would like to say in terms of introductory remarks is simply that the COVID pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic ravages, continues to attack us, but it's not all doom and gloom. The African economy is poised to grow by 3.4% this year, 2021. Aspen, a company in South Africa, is beginning to produce vaccines for Africa in October this year. So this really is good news. Now, the world was actually quickly returning to normal. For instance, we saw on the 11th of July, that would be a remarkable day, because on that day, Euro 20 was played, and there was a massive crowd of 60,000 participants. Those are those with tickets, but some actually crashed through. So the crowd was actually more than 60,000 at Wembley, without masks on, largely, shouting and cheering. And then Wimbledon, that same day, 11th July, also was held with 15,000 fans on the center court. I think 12,000 on court one, largely without masks. So then we saw a semblance of normalcy returning, but unfortunately in Africa we have been hit by the third wave, and unfortunately 1.7% of the vaccines worldwide only have been administered in Africa, whereas as Africa we are 17% of the global population. So this vaccine nationalism really should stop, and we really need to get vaccinated as the vaccine rollout happens. So this is what I would like to say in terms of introductory remarks. And at this stage now, I have got the pleasure to call upon Able to make a presentation on textiles and clothing value chains. Now, I hope Able, you're ready or on standby. Let me just check whether you're actually there. I don't want to give you the floor when you are not around. Yeah, Able, are you around? Right. Able Kamau. Right. So Able Kamau, could you please take the floor? But before Able does that, let me turn the floor back to Favour, who is our moderator, to do what moderators do, which he's doing actually properly. Back to you, Favour, then. Thank you so much for this opportunity to make some introductory remarks. I was simply checking whether Able was there because at first he had not joined yet. All right, back to you, Favour.
Thank you very much, Dr. Francis. So yes, in line with the remarks you mentioned, we'll move on to the next sector, where Mr. Abel Kamau is best placed to discuss in terms of the textile industry, his experience, because for these discussions, it's important for us to also have the perspective of the industry, which are basically the people who would be implementing policies, who would be applying policies in a daily scenario, in daily environment. So Mr. Abel Kamau, welcome, and look forward to hearing the discussion from you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon and good morning to our participants. So I'll take you through the presentation on the textiles and apparel sector. I would request that the host enables my screen sharing. I'd just like to do some beaming of some of the slides that I have.
Yes. You can go ahead. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Please confirm once you see it. Can you be able to see my screen?
I believe it's still loading.
Maybe before it loads, let me just maybe preempt some of the discussions in my presentation. I think we can one of the sectors which is of priority, not just within individual countries, but also within regional economic blocks, and also within the continent, is the textiles and apparel sector. And this is mainly driven by its ability, first of all, to create mass employment. Employment is really a key challenge within Africa. Statistically, about over 60% of the population that we have within the continent is underemployed, or can you be able to see the screen now?
It's loading on my side, but maybe the other panelists might be able to see it.
Yeah, sorry, I'm having some technical issues from my screen. But basically, one of the key drivers is the reason as to why the textiles and apparel sector has been regarded to as a priority sector within Africa is its ability to create mass employment. So we have mass job creation that is done at farm level. So this is the production of fibers, and also at the tail end of it, where the production of garments takes place. And if you look at Africa right now, the unemployment levels are ranging to 50%. And within sub-Saharan Africa itself, it is estimated that 40% of people within sub-Saharan Africa are living below $1.5 a day. So one of the other reasons as to why this sector has been prioritized as a sector within the continent is its ability to create wealth within the continent. Then lastly, it's a sector which provides a platform for industrialization. As African lions are looking to take in the global world, both within industrialization and trade, one of the countries and
He's frozen.
Kamau, are you there? Kamau, are you there?
I think we have lost him.
Sorry about that, Mr. Abel Kamau. Maybe as he reconnects, we could have another speaker share a bit on the same. For Ms. Carol Kinotti from Carol Kinotti Brands, the CEO, might you be online?
Hello.
Hello, how are you?
I'm all right. Yeah.
Great. Might you be ready? We could quickly transition to you, or Mr. Abel Kamau, are you back?
Give me a minute or two.
That's all right. That's all right.
In Favour, I was suggesting that maybe Abel could email his presentation to you or one of the organizers, and you could share the screen for him, because it looks like he's having a problem.
Very true. Mr. Abel Kamau, might that be possible? So as you prepare, maybe for Ms. Carol, might you be ready? We could transition. So you could also share, as Abel Kamau also shares the email as well. All right, so I'll start with her introduction. So Ms. Carol Kinoti is the CEO and founder of Carol Kinoti Brands. She's a creative in the fashion industry with over 19 years experience, and her passion and creativity have led her to develop not only a high-end known brand, but also a series of initiatives in a bid to transform the Kenyan fashion industry into a more accessible, sustainable, and ethical industry. She seeks to bring transformation in the fashion industry, by paving the way for creatives to scale their businesses. She's a humanitarian who aims to make a difference in the lives of the vulnerable through the power of partnerships. And she is the founder of Carol Kinoti Brands, Fashion on the Road, the Mavazi Elevate program, and the chairperson of People on the Move. And at Carol Kinoti Brands, they do branded uniforms, interior design consultancy, and under the ready to wear line that has 4 collections so far: the Hariri, the Rafaela, the Dahabu, the Blanchetti collection, and Carol designs feature fabric such as silk and fleece and are synonymous with the kaftans, and more recently the signature Dahabu cuff. For Ms. Carol Kinoti, might she be ready to start? So we could also dive into the textile discussion as well.
So apologies, this is Abel. So one of my other devices logged off.
Oh,
so
sorry
if it's okay, maybe, yeah. So if it's okay with you, can I continue with maybe my remarks on this?
Yes, sir, that's all right. As Ms. Carol also prepares. Would you like to present? Maybe you could share the presentation with us.
Yeah, yes. No, let me not share the presentation, but I'll read it from the perspective as I also present through. So and apologies for that technological mishap. One of the main reasons that that the textile sector has been prioritized, I noted in my previous slide, it's employment creation, wealth creation, and industrialization. And within the African continent, within the AfCFTA, this sector is one of the sectors that will be able at least to transform the African continent towards the African Union's perspectives and aspirations and Agenda 2063. So if we look at production within AfCFTA, there are 2 main fibers that are produced within AfCFTA. So these are the animal-based fibers and the plant-based fibers. And the plant-based fibers mainly it's cotton, and the animal-based fiber, which is mainly produced within the African continent, it's wool. Then we have fibers which are not produced within the African continent, but are used in plenty. And these are the man-made fibers. And ideally, if you look at what everyone, if everyone within this webinar can look at what they are wearing, we can appreciate, and they look at the label behind their clothes, they can appreciate that the use of synthetic fibers, these are the likes of polyester, acrylic, nylon, and viscose, is really growing, and it is slowly pushing the natural fibers into the minority view. So basically the natural fibers, cotton, wool, and such like, they are growing into more niche fibers and luxury brands, and the synthetic fibers are taking over. And if you look at cotton production in Africa versus the world, Africa produces about 6 to 8% of the total world cotton. The largest producer is Asia with about 69% of the world production. America follows with 21.1%. So it's worth noting that even though America is not converting this cotton into fabrics and ultimately into garments, it's still a major player within cotton production within the world. And from history, we know that cotton was regarded to as the white gold in those previous years, it was the product from which countries were able to develop their economic prowess upon, as it was the white gold as at then. And the major producers of cotton within Africa are the likes of Benin, Burkina Faso, Cameroon, Uganda, Ivory Coast, just to name a few. If you look at trade of textiles and apparels within the AfCFTA, it's barely 15%. Africa is barely trading 15% in textiles and apparels produced within the African continent. However, it's worth noting that even though Africa is a net importer of various products within the value chain, this includes fabrics and garments, we are exporting a lot to the rest of the world in terms of apparels. It's worth noting that Africa exports about $11 billion worth of garments to the rest of the world. And these exports are mainly into North America. So this includes the USA and Canada, and largely into the European Union. And if you look at the rules of origin that have enabled Africa to trade with the European Union and North America, basically, we can appreciate the importance of having flexible rules of origin that ensure that Africa is able to trade with what it has. It's able to take cognizant of our current level of industrialization and come up with a structure in which we are able to trade with what we have. And this, I think, translates to the current engagements and negotiations that we have under the textiles and apparel sector within the African Continental Free Trade Area. It's one of the sectors which has pending, which the continent is yet to agree upon. This is on the rules of origin. And the key challenge has been coming up with a rule of origin that ensures that we take into perspective the industrialization levels that we have within across the continent, and ensuring that we are able to trade in a manner that pushes this 15% trade that we're having at least into 30, 40, 50, 60, and ultimately to the highest level that we can, ideally 100%, which is which we can't be able to achieve because Africa is still a player within the global supply chain. So one key thing that we should look at, maybe when you're looking at these rules of origin within the African continent, is to come up with a rule which is flexible enough to ensure that we are able to trade with what we have, with what we currently have. And a good thing to look at is what African countries and regional economic blocks within Africa are using to trade with the rest of the world. And a good case example is what we are using with the European Union, Canada, and also with the United States of America. And this flexibility should ideally be translated into at least the early years of the implementation of the AfCFTA. One of the options that we could look at is having a graduated phased down approach, at least coming up with the rules that enable us to work with what we have, but progressively go into more sophisticated rules that increase the level of local content which is generated from Africa. One key thing that these rules should focus on is that we shouldn't come up with a system where we consolidate Africa as a common market for non-African countries to take advantage of. And this mainly needs to be avoided by at least coming up with rules that enable that that we are creating a common market for Africans to take advantage of. And around these, there are key elements to have in mind, which are driving the trade of the textiles in textiles and apparel sector, which includes the basic element of quality. Everyone wants to wear something which looks good on them. As we move forward, people don't want to look as if they are wearing uniforms. So the issue of mass customization also comes in, where at least we have an element of ensuring that we are able to provide many varieties of the same product, which meet the fashion sense of the end consumer. The other key thing is price. Africa is still, bulk of Africa still has a lot of economic empowerment to do to its population. And as such, the consumer market is really price sensitive. And we should look at an industrialization policy that ensures that we are able to reduce the prices and to provide the products, the textiles and apparel products to the customer at a price sensitive perspective. Then lastly, it's the issue of quantity, which is the volumes. The textiles and apparel sector is a volume driven business, and any rule of origin that we come up with should enable us to achieve these volumes, which determine the competitiveness of the sector. Then lastly, it's time, which is basically the speed to market. And this is a key factor which is driving the fast fashion that previously was in Europe and the US, but it's also slowly coming into Africa as we see more economic empowerment coming into the continent. And this brings us to the need of ensuring that the trade policies that we come up with, which includes the rules of origin, are linked with a vibrant industrialization policy, which will be able to address some of the other areas of driving competitiveness. I think one key thing that needs to be driven in these discussions is that the rules of origin is not the silver bullet to ensuring that we are able to value add 100% of the cotton that we are producing within Africa, 100% of the wool and such like. But it's just one cog within the whole system of ensuring that we are able to create a more industrialized Africa. And as such, there's a need for having an industrialization policy, which is specific to this sector, as it would be for the other sectors as well. And it would need to address the critical factors driving competitiveness. These are in terms of technology upgradation, which is really a key factor which is driving the competitiveness of the African sector. Issues of illicit trade. So we still have a lot of dumped and misdeclared products within the African continent. And this is really stifling growth of products manufactured within the continent. Other areas to look at is areas of financing. The cost of financing is relatively high within Africa. We are talking about double-digit interest rates within Africa. Yet we are supposed to compete with Chinese manufacturers that are almost getting interest-free loans to do investments and growth within investments and trade within China and also outside China. Other areas to look at is the high cost of electricity. It's really high. The average rates within Africa are also double digits, ideally about 15 US cents per kilowatt hour. Yet the competition out there is looking at single digits of about 5 US cents per kilowatt hour. And these are some of the areas that are really needed to be addressed as we try to match the rules of origin with an industrialization Africa as we look towards achieving the Agenda 2063, where having a free trade area within Africa is part of the aspirations. So I think with that, I'll hand over the session to the moderator, and I'll be open to address any questions that may be coming from the attendees. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kamau, and your experience and background also in terms of industry and working as well with Kenya Association of Manufacturers and looking at trade in terms of textiles at the regional level is really insightful. And thank you very much for that as well. We'll also be able to have questions directed to Mr. Kamau as well during the question and answer session shortly after. Next, I'd like to welcome Ms. Carol Kinoti, the CEO of Carol Kinoti Brands, on her presentation on fashion and brands which is more or less a case study from her experience running a fashion house and being in the textile industry, also from an industry perspective and from a manufacturing and production and distribution perspective. So Ms. Carol Kinoti, are you ready?
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, good afternoon.
All right, like you've heard, my name is Carol Kinoti, and I'm going to speak on, on the perspective of having been in the industry for at least over 19 years in Kenya. So practiced it, played it, faced it, and lived it. So having done this for the last 19 years, I've got hands-on experience on the growth that we have been through, from the point at which the consumer did not even appreciate made in Kenya products to the point at which they can proudly want to wear and own a made in Kenya product. However, the challenges that have been there have eased, but they're still, there's still many. And when I look at matters related to the rules of origin, I believe there's a lot that we can share out there. So based on my personal experience as a fashion designer in Kenya with a brand that I would say has touched very many people in terms of usage and employment and practice, I found myself having to prepare 2 other initiatives that are based on the challenges that are faced. And when you look at Africa at large, at the end of the day, we all seem to have faced the same. And if those are taken care of in the process of putting the rules of origin together, then I would say we will be able to compete and do better. So allow me to go over my slide a little bit and just give you a brief of where my mind is. So according to me, where is the gap? So there's an absence of an integrated textile chain across the regions, despite the existence of trading blocks facing the trade, such as the EAC. Kenya has a strong garment manufacturing capacity, but limited backward linkages. The raw materials within the country to support it. We know very clearly about the issue of cotton and having to import as much as possible to be able to produce. Uganda and Sudan are large producers of cotton, but lack further downstream processes that will affect, ourselves and by, extension to the other African countries. Tanzania is diversely equipped in terms of cotton and fabric production capacities, but is limited when it comes to the value addition processes into finished market-ready products. This conclusively means that most of the raw materials produced in bulk in East African community winds up being exported at a very low cost, barring the potential of exponential growth in export manufactured goods. To fill this gap between these countries, there needs to be integration. Just a second. Covering up, just a second. To fill the gap between these countries, there needs to be integration of farm field efficient techniques. There is a need for market intelligence to fully embed the Made in Africa agenda through the regional integration of value chains. The lack of skills and information gap need to be met with intensive establishment for relevant trainings and strengthening existing programs that link directly with the industry at each country's level. So if I have to take you through what I would say the place of a fashion designer in the textile value chain, which is where it is that I sit, I feel like the fashion designers and the graphics designers play a very big role when it comes to the vision and being able to create the trends and the looks that we can proudly say are our own, How do we protect this? How do we invent our own trends? How do we come up with what is unique and authentic enough to be able to compete against that has been there or those that have been there? And in the process of this integration and application of new ideas and, that we could call our own, then we are able to stand out, as being a unique product that we provide as Africans. because we have seen even other external designers in the West taking up what is our own and turning it into theirs and being able to scale it. So fashion designers in the place of the textile industry are in a position to be able to come up with what we can uniquely and authentically call our own, and being able to protect it and patent it so that we do not lose our brand. So this ability to be able to do this, it's almost an ecosystem that has to be put together for fashion designer to pair up with, you know, the media, with the film industry, with the sports, to be able to come up with a way of marketing what is our own, you know, so that it can get popular, so that it can be trendy. And for this, it's good because it supports other people in the industry that support the fashion designers, which is the models, the social media influencers, the photographers, the fine artists. So I feel like a hub or an incubation process need to be put into place, so that as much as the trends and the new ideas and new authentic designs come up, then we are able to put them out there, because fashion is sold through trends, and fashion is sold through the media of movies and sports and music. So an ecosystem that helps us at least pair up with the local producers of fabrics. Locally in Kenya, we have brands like Spinners and Spinners Web, and we have the Beddies and the Sunflags that are very well placed maybe in Ghana, in Uganda, in Nigeria, and it's possible to, you know, take advantage of those areas that already are good enough. But how is it possible to pair them up with the vision bearers, and those are the fashion designers, so that we can tap, you know, from wherever it is at better prices, at you know, with a better product. Because if we have the cotton, then we have a higher brand. Like Abel was able to say that cotton is for the niche market, and with Uganda and you know, places that can manufacture or at least grow cotton, it is possible for us to be able to stand out and produce a more competitive product. So local distribution is key for us. And when we are putting together the rules of origin, I think it's important that the local brands that have proudly, you know, come out and are largely for now importing products, we should be able to, you know, command some kind of percentage that must be at least be coming from the origin of Africa, or at least from the origin of Kenya, so that at least we can have representation locally, even if we are going to insist or try to get into the export market. But we should be able to compete even with the imported clothes for now, because it's a process that has to be faced off over time. And I have proudly been able to find my footing into some of the local distributors who largely import, and we have created space into their shelf because we are able to give them, you know, competitive market. I speak from a point whereby I have tried and tested these processes, and we have, you know, a very good case study on a product that is a winter product that is selling locally, is selling in South Africa, is selling, you know, in different parts of Africa, that is purely made in Kenya, produced in Kenya, knitted in Kenya. And I believe that it is possible for us to find solutions within, if the processes of education and incubation and protection of our brands is done properly. So if I'm to go to the next slide, the rest is much about what I have done as a fashion designer, based on the challenges that we have faced in terms of growth and the suffocation that has come out of Africa, largely bringing in fabrics and bringing in clothes from Turkey and China, and also proudly having people who prefer that they consume what is cheaper or what is coming from outside. We have come up with projects which have successfully shown us that it's possible to do this. And one of those environments that's very good is an executive fashion chain, value chain program that's starting at Strasbourg Business School in September, that will allow fashion designers to be incubated over a period of 1 year, and out of their new brands will come that can be proudly authentically be known as Kenyan products and have small items. Maybe it could just be the beading that is African known, that is applied onto a Western product, but you can compete and say it's unique, it touches the African origin, it touches a little bit of that small thing that makes us stand out. So if you listen to what I'm saying cleanly, you'll see it's a lot to do with being authentic. It's a lot to do with what is that each country in Africa that is unique, that can be scaled, that can be developed, that can be turned into a trend so that it sells widely and better. And most of the rest of the things that you find in this space in this slide is the things that I have tried to do so that I can say that this can be done. We have an annual Fashion on the Road golf tournament coming soon, and this is a platform that we have invited different designers from Tanzania, from Uganda, and Rwanda, and Ethiopia, so that on the common ground we can share ideas and see how can we together trade within each other's space, because they have what we don't have, we have what they don't have, but how do we compete? How do we make sure that if you put it in a store that I will want to buy it instead of the item that comes from Turkey? So we also have a vocational and entrepreneurial skills training that touches the gifted people that have, learning disabilities, because a lot of Africans, we like to use our hands. And those are some of the things that creatives, can use to be able to make us stand out as an African brand, because it's important that we create what it is that African, with the African brand, so that we have a competitive edge in the space of uniqueness. So there are many opportunities around the refugees whose solution, the best solution is fashion and art, to be able to come up with different things. And most of the times the refugees are put into one room, and this particular space, you'll find different communities from different, from Burundi, from Rwanda, from one space. So what am I saying? As we find these solutions across the rules of origin and what it is that we're going to use, we must not forget the space that the fashion designer, who is a creative in the fashion industry, plays. And that is what will give us a competitive edge, because we'll be able to innovate together, we'll be able to come up with unique brands, as long as we're able to put together mentorship programs, programs that touch the empowerment sections that we normally have, that also can be used positively to give us an upper edge beyond anybody else's. So I'll not go back into who I am and what I do, because I believe a brief has been given, but basically that's my voice when it comes to what application about the rules of the origin need to apply for it to actually work for us.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Carol Kinoti, and for sharing about that. Hopefully you can get a chance to also maybe share about your journey in terms of that transition into the industry, because with 19 years of experience, there's a wealth of knowledge, of insights, of wisdom that you can share as well. We'll rush forward, and maybe we'll be able to dive into it maybe during the question and answer session. But thank you again very, very much for sharing and making this presentation, and the efforts and inroads that you're also creating for people in the fashion space, people in the fashion industry, and different players, both people manufacturing, people distributing, people processing. And hopefully with this, we can now create the different platforms, opportunities that businesses can be able to leverage on and grow from. So thank you very, very much. So we will be moving along with our program as well, where we'll be welcoming Mr. Benedict Musengele, who is one of our panelists this afternoon. And he has a wealth of experience, of knowledge, and exposure in this trade space, in the policy space. So just a brief introduction on Mr. Benedict Musengele. So he is a research fellow and head of research at COMESA. Mr. Musengele has worked as the chief technical officer at MA Consulting Group and also as an assistant policy analyst for the Kenya Institute for Public Policy and Research and Analysis, KIPRA, and a consultant for the East African community as an independent ILO evaluator for the Public Procurement and Social Economic Project in South Africa. He was also an economist in the review and update of the Port of Mombasa Master Plan, the EAC Single Customs Territorial Study, and the Intra-Commercial Trade Potential Study and Socio-Economic Impact of COVID-19 in COMESA. Mr. Musengele has a wealth of experience in regional integration and investment based on his working experience in capacity building, in economic and trade policy analysis, and research in various RECs, as well as his academic background, mainly in international trade, investments, and public policy economics, public sector economics. He also holds a master's degree in economics from the University of Malawi, and is currently a PhD final year student in economics at the Kenyatta University in Nairobi, Kenya. So thank you very much, Mr. Benedict Musengele, and I welcome you to take the floor. Thank you. Welcome, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much, Favour, and allow me to share my presentation.
Yes, sir.
I hope you are able to see my presentation.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So I'll be making a presentation on the sugar sector. This is a policy paper, a very brief one, but I'll zero in to what will lead us to the rules of origin which we should be adopting at the AfCFTA. As you are all aware, the sugar sector is one of the sectors where the rules of origin are yet to be concluded. In terms of outline, I'll present the objectives, a brief introduction, classification of sugar, an overview of the sugar sector in Africa, looking at the raw sugar trade, white sugar trade, market access, then the importance of sugar in our continent, and I will be making some recommendations on the rules of origin, which we should be adopting. Basically, I'm looking at two objectives. The first one, to provide general information on trade in sugar, the capacity and the potential of the sugar sector in Africa. And then secondly, to suggest the rules of origin to be adopted in sugar and sugar products trade under the AfCFTA. In terms of introduction, sugar is one of the most important commodities produced and consumed around the world. Approximately 65 million tons is produced each year in around 123 countries. Out of these, 70% of the production is consumed domestically, and 30% is traded in the international market. And sugar in most of the countries and regions is treated as a sensitive product together with the dairy products. Both the international price and domestic price of sugar are distorted. In other words, we cannot say that we have a linear pricing trend for sugar. It depends on the key market players in this sector. And the sugar is mainly produced from two sources. One is the sugar cane, and two is the beets. Here in Africa, you find that most of our sugar is produced from the cane, with Egypt being the only country which produces sugar from the beet. But when you go to Europe, you find that most of the sugar is produced from the beet. The difference between the beet and the cane is the beet matures within 6 months, while the cane in most of the countries, and depending on whether they are using irrigation or rain-fed agriculture, it takes from 1 year, that is around 10 months, to around 2 years, the countries where they use rain-fed. In terms of classification, sugar is classified under Chapter 17 of the HS codes. And when we look at 17.0.111, that's the raw sugar, and then the raw cane sugar. And then when we go to 171.12, that is the raw beet sugar. And then 171.13 is the raw cane sugar. The 170.111 is just raw sugar, whether cane or beet. And then the 112 and 113 splits the cane and the beet. And then 114 is other raw cane sugar not specified under 170.113. Then under 170.191, we have the refined sugar containing flavoring or coloring. And then 170.199, we have refined sugar not containing flavoring or coloring matter. You realize that what we are calling refined sugar is what is commonly known as the industrial sugar. Then when we go to Chapter 17.02, we have other sugars, including chemically pure lactose, maltose, glucose, and fructose in solid form. 17.03 is the molasses. Molasses is some of the byproducts which we obtain when we are extracting sugar from the sugar cane. And 14.04 is what we call the sugar confectionery, which includes products like the white chocolate. In terms of the sugar sector in Africa, sugar is produced by 33 countries in Africa, and this is mainly through irrigation. On average, we produce 10.3 million metric tons and consume 18.6 million metric tons. Out of these, the tripartite region, which Dr. Mangeni indicated that it constitutes 29 countries, mostly from the Southern Africa and the East Africa region, bearing in mind there are 3 RECs which forms the tripartite, the EAC, COMESA, and SADC, accounts for 89% of Africa's production. And this is dominated by countries such as Egypt and South Africa, who account for 40% of that production. Other major producers are Sudan, Eswatini, Kenya, Morocco, Mauritius, Uganda, Ethiopia, Mozambique, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. The leading producers are also the leading consumers in sugar. And this correlates well with the earlier statement that 70% of the production is domestically consumed. Egypt and South Africa consumes 28% of the total consumption. And Nigeria, which is a non-producer, consumes 8%. From the figures provided for production and consumption, if you take 18.6 and you net out 10.3, it gives you a deficit of 8.3 million metric tons. This is the deficit which currently, as a continent, we import from outside our region to meet our total demand for sugar. Out of the 33 producing countries, the surplus producing countries are Eswatini, Malawi, Mauritius, Mozambique, Uganda, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. That tells you we have only 7 surplus sugar producers. The rest are deficit sugar producing countries. When we zero in to the raw sugar, you find that on average, if we look at 2013 to 2017, we exported 1.2 million tons of raw sugar. And this was just 6% of what Brazil as a country exported, and 3% of the world's total exports. An indication that although we have surplus producing countries, compared to the global production, we may not be a major producer. Out of these total exports of 1.2 million tons, the tripartite region accounted for 99.6%. And this could be because most of the surplus producers are from this country. The leading exporters here were Eswatini, South Africa, Mozambique, and Zimbabwe. Sorry for that. I had not removed voice from my phone. Among these leading export destinations, we have the EU and the USA. And why the EU has been one of our leading export destinations is because of the preferential treatment which our originating sugar was being accorded in the EU through what we call nothing but harms arrangement. The continent imports 6.3 million metric tons of raw sugar, mainly from Brazil. And the leading importers of these raw sugar are Algeria, Nigeria, Egypt, and Morocco, who accounted for 85%. In terms of the white sugar, where we see now the industrial sugar following under, we exported on average 3.7 million metric tons from 2013 to 2017. This constituted 71% of the Brazilian exports and the 15% of world exports. And therefore, it shows that when it comes to the white sugar, we are a major exporter as compared to the raw sugar. And the leading exporters here of the white sugar, which is the industrial sugar, were Algeria, Mauritius, Somalia, Eswatini, Sudan, and Djibouti. And you find that the major exporters here also include producers and non-producers of sugar. The producers here, we are only seeing Mauritius, Eswatini, and Sudan. And of course, the non-producers, we are having Algeria here and Somalia. The leading destinations are EU and Africa. So unlike the raw sugar, the white sugar, we find ourselves exporting more within the continent. The imports were 6.8 million metric tons and were mainly from Brazil, India, United Arab Emirates, and African countries. The leading importers here are Sudan, South Africa, Angola, Ghana, and Mauritania. And you find that unlike the raw sugar, the white sugar is imported by almost all the countries. As we can see, 48 countries do import the white sugar. So in terms of market access, African countries apply lower tariffs on raw sugar as compared to white sugar. When we look at the ESC partner states, they apply a tariff of 67.5% on raw sugar and a tariff of 100% on white sugar. The other countries apply 30% and below on raw sugar and 35% and below on white sugar. The reason why we see the difference between the two is because sometimes the raw sugar is refined to obtain the white sugar for industrial purposes. And therefore, you find that given that the continent has not been producing enough raw sugar to meet its demand, they end up importing some raw sugar to process to obtain the white sugar. And maybe just to highlight the difference between the two, the only difference between raw sugar and white sugar is the molasses content. For the raw sugar, the molasses content is around 2%, and therefore the pure sucrose will range from around 98 to around 99.8%. But when it comes to the white sugar, purification methods take place to ensure that we are left with almost pure sucrose at around 99.9%. And therefore, the molasses levels in white sugar are very low. And this is the white sugar we use for industrial purposes. The importance of the sugar sector. The sugar sector is very important to our continent and to the producing countries, because through production of sugar, we are able to cogenerate electricity, which is very critical in running the operations in the sugar factories, as well as exporting to the national grid. In the process of producing sugar, we do extract the molasses, which are used for production of ethanol, which has got many other uses within our economies, including blending with the diesel to get a more greener energy. It can also be used for production of aesthetics, things like the cutex used by our ladies, among others. It also, through the production of sugar, we can also be able to produce potash as a form of fertilizer. This is from the ash we obtain from burning the bagasse. The bagasse here is the leftovers from the cane after we have extracted the sucrose or the juice. It is also a major employer across the continent and a major contributor to countries' GDP. Having said that, we have already seen that the sugar sector is critical in our continent, but as it is, we are not able to produce enough for our continent, as shown by the deficit of around 8.3 million metric tons. But the good news is we have the potential to produce sugar to meet our continental demand. And what we need in place is good rules of origin to promote more sugar production within the continent and allow for ease of movement of sugar from the surplus producing countries to the deficit producing countries, because the surplus producing countries are not operating at optimal, so they have capacity to increase their production. But sugar being a sensitive product, they need to be assured of market before they can expand their production. And this can only be attained through having rules of origin, which promotes trade of sugar originating from the continent. And therefore, we suggest that for sugar production, we have a wholly produced criterion being adopted so as to promote production of raw sugar, which can be used for further processing to obtain the industrial sugar. We have to accept the fact that there is very limited production of industrial sugar in our continent, and therefore countries should provide incentives to encourage the manufacturing sector to venture into the production of industrial sugar. But we do have adequate capacity to produce the raw sugar. The cost of producing industrial sugar is a bit high, but we believe with incentives, we can have more players within the continent venturing into the production of industrial sugar, which has got a very high level of trickle-down effects and benefits to the masses, because sugarcane and beets is a bulk production crop, which requires many of the low-level Africans or kind of labor to be involved in its production. And once we have that rule of origin, Then countries will increase their production of both raw and white sugar with the incentives. And then we need to continue imposing restrictive tariff on non-originating white sugar and some tariff on raw sugar to protect the domestic sugar industries. And countries should address tariff and non-tariff barriers to sugar trade prevalent in the continent. And finally, we need to modernize sugar production. When we talk of modernization here, those countries who rely heavily on rain-fed agriculture, especially in the production of sugar, they should move to irrigation and use high-quality sugar varieties, those ones which are able to mature within 8 to 12 months. And this will increase the cycles of sugar production, at the same time increase the quantity available within the continent. Moderator, that's what I can say for now on sugar, but I'll be ready to respond to any questions because I had to shorten my presentation given the short time available. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. Wow, and I think with the experience in the trade space across the region, and also now from your research with your PhD, and also your research in terms of just policy and the industry side of it as well, is really, really insightful. So thank you very, very much, sir. And we look forward to further discussions on it, and as well as any questions that would arise during the question and answer session. So thank you very much for that. So next we'll be moving to Dr. Francis Mangeni for the next session. So just to introduce him briefly, he is a senior fellow at the Nelson Mandela School of Public Governance and an advisor to the African Continental Free Trade Area. And he has also served as the head of trade promotion and programs of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. His past positions include senior economist and diplomat at the African Union Embassy to the UN, the WTO and the Common Fund for Commodities, and the African Regional Trade Policy Advisor. He was Director of Trade, Customs and Monetary Affairs at the Common Market for Eastern and Southern Africa, COMESA, from 2009 to 2020. Dr. Francis Mangeni has also various charities which support public health and education, and holds a doctorate in international economic law from the London School of Economics and Political Science in the United Kingdom. And you can also be able to learn more about him and a few of his areas of interest and his different engagements at his website, which is www.francismangeni.com. And you'll be able to learn more and engage more as well, and also on LinkedIn. So thank you very much, Daktari, and welcome, and look forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Favour, and I am pleased to make this presentation. Now, I would like to start with some trivia, if you don't mind. And the trivia are as follows. There are some figures which I have just been looking at. The market, global market for used cars is estimated at $250 billion. And it is projected to grow to $403 billion by 2026. Now, a question which arises is, how do we continue to use used cars, or how do used cars continue to be predominant on the market when we are talking about made in Africa cars? That's the challenge. It's a political question. It is an economic question. But we need to take into account the fact that in the long run, used cars, of course, are more expensive. They contribute to 25% of the greenhouse gas emissions, and therefore to global warming. So we need to take a holistic approach. And I would like to begin by saying that as a matter of fact, the market for new cars, or cars that are made in Africa, cars that are being produced by African-owned companies is actually the potential is quite high. Now, let me just say, show you some examples of this. I'm wondering why this screen is not moving because I can just talk, but I want to show some pictures, right? Can I have this screen moving, please?
Yes, sorry, I think there might be an internet connection issue. Maybe you could stop share and reshare.
All right, I have stopped the sharing, right?
Right.
This is quite embarrassing. I didn't expect it to be like this. Right.
Sorry about
All
that.
right, now share. Let me share again. Right. All right, so there you go. So now we have got the Innoson. It's a Nigerian car. 10,000 have already been sold. This business was started by a 25-year-old boy, right? So it shows that startups can actually work. But in ECOWAS, of course, we know there's a preference for beginning to assemble cars from completely knocked down units rather than semi-knocked down units. It is a posh car, I would like to suggest to you. I hope you agree. Right. Now, this is Wally's car, is a car produced out of Tunisia. They sell 300, 600 units a year on demand or on order. It's their strategy. They export across Northern Africa and also in the Middle East, of course, showing you that big markets actually matter. Now, this is Kantan car. I actually used to ride in this car when I was in Accra. I was in Accra for a bit of last year and this year. And they plan to export across Africa, taking advantage of the African continental free trade area. Listening to the owners of this project or this business, they say that innovation and perseverance have governed them to get to where they are. But of course, also government policy and frameworks have been very supportive in Ghana. They tend to produce various models, including electric cars. Now, this is Mobius. It's produced in Kenya. They have got a plant and an outlet on the Mombasa Road. This car actually costs only $10,000 from the factory. It's designed in Africa, built for Africa. Well, I actually ordered two of these, if I can share with you a personal story. But I had to get back my deposit because the cars took too long to come. And talking with the management, they even didn't know about rules of origin and preferential access. So there's here some policy implication that we need to educate our car producers about how to produce a car that's made in Africa and that can take advantage of preferential access to our continental markets. The first versions were rugged, but the new ones are quite posh, as you can see in that picture. Now, how about Uganda? We have got electric cars. We have even got a solar bus, right? The solar bus is called the Kayola solar bus. It uses actually a solar panel which is on top, on the roof. Now, the good thing about these cars, especially this bus, is that they use a lot of local content, local materials for furnishing inside their bus. And this increases the local content of the bus. It's a green car. They are green buses. They are also for mass transportation through the city. The other thing about this is that it was a partnership between the university. It is a partnership between the university and the government. The government owns more than 90%. But the design, the whole concept was actually done by university students from Makerere University, which started off as an international competition organized by MIT. Now, what about back and sports cars out of South Africa? You know, these cars are being sold all over the world as a matter of fact, you know. So they have got a global market for this. But they're also producing electric cars. And these are owned by South African companies. But also they produce Mercedes-Benz's, BMWs, which they assemble, as I should say, to sell on the AGOA market and AGOA to the US market. and also to the European market under the agreement that South Africa has with the US. Now, Morocco is a heavyweight in car production in Africa. They produce this car, which is really good, in addition to other cars, which have got French models or French origins. And as you know, Morocco has been seeking to join ECOWAS, to rejoin the African Union, and now is aggressively targeting African markets under the African Continental Free Trade Area. So then what I'm trying to show, dear brothers and sisters, is that Africa is not tabula rasa when it comes to the car industry. We've got the potential, we've got cars, we have started production. The question is, how do we grow this and have regional value chains? Now, I believe rules of origin, this is where they come in very handy to help us. And the status is as follows when it comes to rules of origin that have been agreed and that can be used. And I'd like to take a broad approach covering the transport sector, other aspects of the transport sector as well. Now, on railways, tramways, the rule of origin has been agreed under Chapter 86. It's changing tariff heading, or 60% value of non-originating material. 60% value of non-originating material means 40% local content, the reverse is 40%. Now, when it comes to aircrafts, spacecrafts, and parts, Chapter 88, again, it is changing tariff heading, or 60% value of non-originating material. Now, are these things useful? Yes, because in Ethiopia, we have got tramways in the city in Addis Ababa. So this shows that it's feasible for public transportation to actually be assisted through manufacturing of railways and tramways and automobiles as well, of course. Then aircrafts, of course, we are assembling parts in Mauritius. They have moved into that space already. Now, Chapter 89, ships, boats, and floating structures, that rule of origin has also been agreed as CTH, or 60% value of non-originating materials. Now, when it comes to vehicles, Chapter 87, that rule has not been agreed yet, except vehicle parts and accessories. That's the inputs, the components. And the rule of origin there is 60% value of non-originating materials. 87.15, that's baby carriages, is the same 60% value of non-originating materials, or as I have explained, that means 40% local content. So this is where things stand. So in other words, the outlier, or the thing that needs to be agreed, the outstanding thing, is the general rule on vehicles under Chapter 87. Now, we would like to propose that the auto value chain can raise local content to 40%, maybe even more of the total value. Because look at the raw materials for autos. You need steel, you need aluminum, you need leather, you need rubber, you need plastic, you need glass. In terms of subcomponents, you need welding of the bodies, fabrication, shearing, bending, stamping. Main components, you need the drive chain, the gearbox, steering, electronics. And of course, the original equipment manufacturers do the assembling and the production, preferably from completely knocked down kits. Now, this should really generate enough local content to reach 40% if we have enough market information to source these components from within Africa. However, there are also downstream services such as marketing and distribution, services and parts, transport and logistics, insurance and finance, plastic and glass, which generate employment on the continent. Now, a checklist for investing in the automobile sector, this really raises policy issues, what we need to watch, bearing in mind that the automotive sector is capital intensive and requires long-term planning. So we need political will to develop the sector as a pillar of the economy. China at some stage had to adopt this policy that the automobile sector is a pillar of the economy. And they passed several policies, several laws that enable the economy to have backward, forward, and horizontal linkages, the sector to have these linkages into the economy. So we need policies and laws, institutions established, action plans, and of course, public-private sector partnerships. Now, in the context of Africa, can we begin thinking of maybe a political declaration on this, in this regard? You need political and macroeconomic stability to enable, of course, business to happen. You need impetus and the context for industrialization and value chains, value addition, diversification, technology, and innovation. You need to have this as a priority within the country, within the region, on the continent, in order to provide ground for the automotive sector to grow. A vibrant innovation ecosystem, which is driven by rapidly changing models and engineering. We are talking about floating cars and trains, for instance. Large markets we are required for economies of scale and critical levels of investment, because the automobile sector is quite capital intensive. It's business, it requires a lot of heavy investment. So you need the economies of scale, large markets. And you need effective demand. That large market should have people who can actually buy these cars. So you need financial and insurance products. So a financial and insurance sector which is strong, vibrant, is extremely important. Then you need infrastructure for effective connectivity, not just the physical roads and the energy, but also the ICT. You need digital infrastructure for modern cars. Then competitive suppliers of components and parts, including tier 1 and tier 2, skilled population and labor force, efficient supply chain, and logistics sector to support production and customer care. So this framework also helps to increase local content. Now, is this sector extremely important as a pillar of the economy? Bearing in mind that a car, a passenger car, for instance, has 30,000 components, or at least a minimum of 5,000 components. So these parts reflect the scope of the regional value chains that can be created. The auto industry promotes technology spillovers and division and diffusion into other sectors of the economy through learning, replication, and scaling. This is actually how economies grow, through new products that come up as a result of learning, replication, scaling in the context of innovation. The auto sector promotes overall economic efficiency through mass urban and intercity transport for people and goods, growth of supply chains and distribution services between production units and to customers, and growth of construction industries, of course. Greening of the auto sector, you remember we said we have EVs already, even a solar bias, right? Solar powered bias. Protects the environment and increases local content. It's estimated by UNEP, for instance, that, as I said earlier, 25% of energy-related greenhouse gases are from vehicles, which destroy the environment. So EVs and hybrids will create value chains into the minerals and extractive sectors. Lithium batteries, for instance, and we know lithium is being produced in Congo DR. It's one of the biggest global producers. Mid and downstream activities for production, sales, and service. So, colleagues, this is what I wanted to share with you. And these are the questions that I propose, or some issues that we can look at. Africa doesn't need second-hand cars. This is what President Paul Kagame said when they were rolling out VW cars of the production line in Rwanda a year or so ago. As you can see in that picture, they're even assembling drones and maintaining them in Rwanda. We need an auto sector pact. This is what the African Association of Automobile Manufacturers have proposed to the ministers. Thirdly, senior officials could consider the threshold for local content for vehicles. This is what the ministers responsible for the AfCFTA have requested the senior officials to do when they meet on the 2nd to 6th of August. That's just next week. So what do you think about this? And do we need an AU declaration on priority regional value chains for the African continental free trade area, which you could presumably include the automotive sector? Right, so these are my contacts in case you want to get in touch with me. And I'm recommending a book that I wrote with Professor Calestos Jr. It's called Emergent Africa, which explores the evolution of regional economic integration in Africa for context. So we are creating one African market. Right, so this is what I had to say. Back to you, Favour, and I look forward to some questions, some input, some exchange of views from the participants and you fellow panelists. Back to you, Favour. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, sir, for that deep engagement to the car sector. And one thing that's interesting about Dr. Francis Mangeni is he's multifaceted. Until before this webinar, many people may not have known that this was his deep interest in the car sector, to the extent that he had began a pre-order for a Mobius, although it didn't work, but that's passion right there. So thank you very much.
I did actually.
Yes, yes. So that is excellent. So thank you very much, sir. Also, because of time, we will quickly jump into the next section. We were meant to have the Q&A, but we'll jump into the next section where we'll have Honorable Gyud Moore, who will share next, who is a senior policy fellow and at the Center of Global Development. So brief on Mr. Gyud Moore. He's a senior policy fellow at the Center of Global Development, where Moore served as a deputy chief of staff to the President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf and head of the President's Delivery Unit. Mr. Moore is a lecturer at the University of Chicago's Harris School of Public Policy, where he teaches a class on the role of infrastructure in the practice of foreign policy and international development. He currently serves on the board of advisors to the Master of Science in Foreign Service program at Georgetown University, and on the board of directors for management sciences at the Health and the Charter Cities Institute. He holds a bachelor's degree in political science from Berea College and a master's degree in foreign policy and international security from Georgetown University. So thank you very much, Mr. Gyud Moore, and we welcome you to take forward on this session. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Favour, and we're out of time, so I'll try not to take up too much time and just a few comments. I think the presentations today sort of make as compelling a case as possible as we can get for why we need to focus on rules of origin, because there's no way to actually take advantage of the preferential trade agreements without clarifying rules of origin. They've been described sort of as a passport for goods entering countries, so that members of the AfCFTA get preferences that non-members do not. But I just wanted to highlight a couple of things, since my focus here is usually on infrastructure. The goal of the AfCFTA is to increase regional trade, and rules of origins will actually help to develop regional value chains. It is almost impossible for us to exploit regional value chains without regional transport networks. We have to make investment in infrastructure. If we're going to invest in regional value chains, we need to build digital infrastructure so that we're connected digitally across the region. And so the need for rail infrastructure, road infrastructure to make it possible so that we can trade in intermediate goods remains really pertinent. The final thing that I want to say is, because my expertise isn't in designing rules of origin, my expertise is in governance, in acquiring power and holding on to power, because I served for 9 out of the 12 years of the president's 2 terms. So for presidents, heads of state, prime ministers who are going to be approving this and submitting these, but what is most concerning to them, of course, is to hold on to power. And so the political economy of this reform has to be taken into account. The backlash that we're seeing across the Western world that gave rise, for example, to the emergence of President Trump and America First, was because this backlash, a large part of it, is against globalization and trade liberalization, because the benefits of liberalization is not equitably shared. And because the benefits of globalization have not been equitably shared, people have become disillusioned with it. And so I think as we design rules of origin, it's important for us to keep in mind it is important for us to keep in mind that we have to take into account the weakest states in Africa and the most vulnerable groups in those states, because that's how we determine the incentives for states to continue to act there. Now, for the smaller states, the incentive would be to undermine that. There will be incentives for them to undermine rules of origin, as we've seen happening right now between Nigeria and Benin. So it is important for us to keep our minds on the smaller states and to also acknowledge that in the short to medium term, the benefits of rules of origin it is not, the benefit is not obvious. It takes a while for the benefits to begin to spread. And the third and final thing I will add to that is that in the initial years, the lead firms capture an overwhelming majority of the benefits of liberalization. And so it means that if you're a producer in Nigeria, if you're a producer in Liberia, it is a bit difficult, because for firms in South Africa and Morocco, they will be in a better position to take advantage of this. And so even as we design these rules of origin, I think it's important for us to take into account, one, the political economy, two, the weakest states in Africa and the most vulnerable groups, three, recognizing that the benefits are not immediate in the short to medium term, and lead firms will benefit more. I think if we keep this in mind as we design these rules of origin, especially with the mind of growing intermediate trade intermediate group goods on the continent, I think we're on the right path, and that we should continue to do this. Again, thank you for having me today, and it's a pleasure being here. Favour, I've been really, really impressed with your moderation, by the way.
Oh, thank you very much, sir. Thank you. So wow, that is really interesting, and it's interesting that you sit both in the academic and the advisory and the policy side of this discussion. So your experience and your insights are really, really, really interesting. So thank you very much, sir. So as we move along, before we come back to you, we will be moving on to the next section of our program, as you also move towards the end as well, where we'll have Professor Issa Baluch, who is the chairman of the African Agribusiness Knowledge and Innovation Leadership Initiative, where with his experience we'll get to hear more. And just a brief about him, he's a specialist and investor in industrialization, as well as an advisory member to the CJLF, which is the Calestis Juma Legacy Foundation. He's a member of the Dean's Council at Harvard Kennedy School, Business School. In 2012, he was a senior advanced leadership fellow at the Harvard University. He's a chair professor at the College of Maritime Science and Management Institute as well. And these are just a brief, high-level introduction on who he is as a person. So, Professor Issa Baluch, welcome to share a bit more as well.
Thank you, Favour. Well done, Francis and Diana. This has been quite educational. I had my notes that I thought I would prepare and share with you, but this morning I have learned quite a bit, and I must say my immediate reaction takes me to countries like Japan, Singapore, Malaysia, and a number of others that I've interacted with over the years, where their claim was they only started off with air and the people they had. They did not have resources that we have in Africa. So I think in many ways, more than one, Africa is blessed because we have all the resources you can think of, including an abundance of manpower, young people ready to dive in. And this takes me to the discussions that have been outlined over and over, the facts that have come out. Rules of origin, very important. Transparency, I heard that over and over. Technology, flexible rules. I think these are all so important. Takes me to what Dr. Mangeni mentioned. A car has 30,000 components, and my question is, how many components does the AfCFTA has, and how to make sure that each component passes the stress test so that they can survive, they can thrive, and there is durability. I think these are all very, very important questions to think of. The AfCFTA produces an enormous amount of opportunities, but is not short of challenges, and most definitely competition. both in soft and hard areas. And so I think in preparing ourselves to take advantage of the opportunities, we have to have a good handle of all these challenges that are there and smarten our ways as we move forward. And the ultimate, in the end, it comes down to oversight and the rule of law. This is going to be very important as part of the stress test of the AfCFTA. We've got to have very matured oversight, and we've got to have very, very durable rule of law that can put this to test and get us across the finish line. And not only that, as Africans, as we move forward, we will have to consume made in Africa. This is going to be very important, another challenge. So the journey starts, and at any given point, one needs to know, where are we in this journey? What state of position are we in? That is going to be very important. It's a moving target. There will be many challenges as the competition reinforces itself. But I think in the scheme of things, Made in Africa is going to be very crucial for our generation to come and the young people. And this is an exciting time to be living in, as we see what has been tested, what has not been accomplished in the past is finally taking place. So, in view of the time constraints, I would like to thank again all the organizers. This has been an eye-opener in many respects, and I wish you all the best in the endeavor as we move forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, sir. And that's very interesting, because you've also now taking it back to us as consumers, as Africans as well, that we have to buy African to build African as well. And it's interesting that you pointed out the analogy that Dr. Francis Mangeni had applied in the scenario of the car industry, where a car has between 5,000 and 30,000 components. And you brought out how many, the key question is, how many components does the AfCFTA have? And as 54 member states, and the different micro and macro factors and moving parts and policies and actors and stakeholders, those all form the engine that is the AfCFTA, that is the African Union, that is Africa as a whole. And how many moving parts are there, and how best can we make them efficient, as you mentioned? How best can we streamline and make sure that each part is productive, each part is contributing in a key factor, each part is furthering progress? Just like a car is an entity that provides mobility. How best is each one playing their part? So that is very interesting. So thank you very much for that. I'm not sure, maybe I could just a quick advice from Dr. Francis Mangeni. Maybe do you think we could take on a question or two before we close? Dr. Francis Mangeni.
Oh, all right. I think you had frozen briefly there. So yeah. So let me yes. Yeah. So now, dear my brothers and sisters, what we have been saying is, on the one hand, very young people, right? Favour, who has been the moderator this time, Diana, who has been in the background, she was the moderator for the first webinar we had. These are very young people, all right? They are African young trade professionals. They have formed themselves into an organization. So we have been seeing them, and I hope you agree. I heard Honorable Gilmore say how vibrant, how very well presented Favour, our moderator, has been, and how he has done very well. So that has been on the one hand. On the other side of the spectrum, we have had trailblazers, very well accomplished people. The Honorable Gilmore, former minister, now a scholar, and working with a very prestigious think tank, a global prestigious think tank. And then Professor Baluch, very well accomplished as an academic, as a business person, as a leader. So we have seen the two sides, working together jointly. It's more or less like we are preparing to pass on the torch to the young generation. There's a saying that if you see a forest and you don't see any young trees in it, you know that forest is not going to be there for a long time. Right. So I really welcome this engagement between the young and the not so young. I call Issa amigo, so I'm not going to call him anything other than not so young. He is not old at all. Right. And then secondly, I would like to thank all my colleagues who have been panelists on this event. I think this has gone very well. Our colleague Abel had some challenges at the beginning. Sorry about that to everybody, and to you, Abel. It was not of your making, but we learned, and I hope that next time we shall try to be, seamless as we do this webinar. Then lastly, this is the second webinar. We are going to have more to come. So please stay tuned, and we encourage you to continue joining these webinars as we support the continental process, as we try to achieve socioeconomic transformation, to improve living standards, to create decent jobs, to raise incomes on the continent. This is our lifetime challenge, the challenge of our generation and the next generation, to see the Africa we want by being the Africans we want ourselves. So that's all I have to say. Back to you, Favour, to close this session, and we wind up. Thank you so much, everybody, all the participants.
Thank you very much, Dr. Francis Mangeni, who's been mentoring this whole process, the webinars, the engagement, the speakers, the subject matters, the topics. So it's been really, really, really insightful. So thank you very much, Dr. Francis Mangeni. Thank you, Mr. Abel Kamau, who from Kenya Association of Manufacturers, a senior executive and a key player in the textiles and clothing sector, both from the policy, the lobbying, and the engagement with industry perspective. And Ms. Carol Kinoti, who is the CEO of Carol Kinoti Brands. Thank you very much from your industry perspective, your professional perspective, your knowledge perspective as well. That was very interesting, both in the scope of your understanding of the complete value chain in terms of textiles and the fashion industry. And thank you, Mr. Benedict Musengele, who from COMESA, and being a senior research fellow, and your experience in policy, experience in research, academia as well, with your PhD that's actually ongoing as well, and your insights into the sugar sector, both not just from a Kenyan perspective, an East Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa, but from an African perspective and a global perspective in terms of where does Africa fit in, where does the AfCFTA fit in, where do sugar players and stakeholders fit in, and that's very interesting, and how best we can move forward. So thank you very much for that. And Dr. Francis Mangeni, it was also very interesting to learn that you're also a car lover as well as many other hats that you wear with your presentation on the automotive sector. So thank you very much, sir, that you're able to quickly, pivot to that other side of you in sharing about the automotive sector, which is key to the African growth, which is key for the manufacturing sector and the AfCFTA as a whole. And for Mr. Gude Moore, for your insights and perspective on really the rules of origin, but also your perspective on regional trade, on partnerships, on global development, on Africa as a whole in terms of manufacturing, the role that we play. And last but not least, Professor Issa Baluch, who's also the chairman of the Africa Agribusiness and Knowledge and Innovation Leadership Initiative, for your call to action, for your perspective and your insight into where this conversation rules of origin fits in with the AfCFTA, Africa as a whole, and how each one can really plug in and play their part as well. So thank you very much, sir, for that. And also to my partner, Diana Awar, who's also was back in the background helping with the technical activities and support. So thank you very much for that. And Raquel Curia, who's also been there. So thank you very much. And to the rest of the AYTP team for your support and also working towards to make this possible. And to the trustees, Mr. Martin Bayer, Dr. Rosemary, and Mr. Teddy Warrior. So thank you all very much. And to our attendees and supporters, thank you very much. And we look forward to the next session of the webinar, where we'll discuss further matters and be able to engage further. So thank you all very much. And to those, good evening. good afternoon, and those watching later, good morning as well. So thank you. Thank you.